Washington, 1991. Cold case solved. Arrest shocks Seattle community. Sea mist moves across the pier like breath on glass. Sodium lights blink. Gulls cry. A call bell clatters in the distance. A lone camera strap hangs from a chain-link fence. It rocks once, then still. 33 years later, that strap gives up its secret. Seattle says a name. The Cartwright case is solved. A convoy of unmarked SUVs turns into a quiet cul-de-sac in Shoreline. It is just after sunrise, on a February morning. Detective Mara Kline rides shotgun. She checks the warrant against the house number. Blue siding, 2 stories, a sagging basketball hoop. Neighbors peer through blinds. The front door opens. A man steps out in a gray sweatshirt and old work jeans. He looks at the line of officers. He lowers his eyes. His name is Daniel Rusk. He has lived here for nearly 3 decades. Cameras click. A body mic records boots on wet concrete. Handcuffs close with a small metallic snap that sounds louder than it is. Seattle police hold a noon press conference. Chief Karen Duarte stands at the podium. "Today, our detectives arrested 62-year-old Daniel Rusk," she says. The arrest relates to the 1991 murder of Lena Marie Cartwright. Advances in forensic genealogy made this possible. The headline is simple. Forensic genealogy from degraded DNA on a camera strap leads to a suspect. The suspect is a familiar face. The city is stunned. Lena Cartwright was 23. She was a photojournalist. She vanished on a foggy night in May of 1991. Her teal hatchback was found near Pier 57. Her body was found days later in a vacant lot by the old rail yards. She had been strangled. Her camera and last roll of film were missing. The case went cold for decades. Evidence sat in boxes. The strap was logged, bagged, and forgotten, except by a slim file note. Then a new lab said yes to an old question. Could sweat locked in woven fibers still talk? It could. A private lab in Vancouver, Washington, cleaned the sample. A partial profile emerged. Not enough for the national database, enough for genealogy. Markers were uploaded to a public DNA site. A distant cousin in Oregon appeared. The family tree spiraled outward, then inward. Genealogist Eli Morin built 14 trees. He checked birthplaces. He checked draft cards and marriage licenses. He drew a line that crossed Seattle in 1991. At the end of the line sat one name: Daniel Rusk, a contractor who once worked maintenance on the waterfront. Detectives watched. They collected a discarded coffee cup. The lab compared the sample to the strap profile. The result came back as a match. Not close. Exact. They served the warrant. They led Rusk down his front steps. And a city that had grown taller and richer since 1991 felt small again. A neighbor whispers to a reporter, "He built my porch last summer." In Spokane, Lena's mother sits by a window with a faded newspaper clipping. Ruth Cartwright answers the phone. She listens. She presses the clipping flat with a trembling hand. "You think you will feel joy," she tells a camera later. "Mostly it is quiet." That's the medically, Braver Menabledan. Process stated any play. Seattle, 1991. Before the boom. Before the skyline doubled. The air smells like salt and diesel and wet cedar. Belltown is still warehouses. The waterfront is gulls and splinters and men in orange vests. Lena carries a Canon AE, one with red tape on the grip. She collects corners of the city. Fog over Market Street. Buskers under a bridge. Hands at a payphone. Her notebook holds short captions. Her dream has a title: Vanishing Corners of Seattle. Her Sunday calls home are ritual. She rings her mother even when there is nothing to say. Just to say nothing, Ruth likes to joke. On a Friday night in May, Lena goes to the pier. She is chasing a shot of neon reflected in black water. Her car parks crooked. Somebody stands near her, close enough to talk, not close enough to touch. Later, that becomes a question. Who was near her? Where did the roll of film go? 2 days pass. A maintenance worker finds her car. Police open the passenger door and see the camera bag. It is empty. The strap is looped through the metal ring on the seat. The strap has no camera attached. The strap goes into an evidence bag. Gloved hands press the seal. A pen scratches a label. Bag to box, box to shelf. Time moves on. They find Lena in a vacant lot by the rail yards. Grass leans in one direction from wind and foot traffic. There is no murder weapon. There are no clear prints. Just loss, and a city that does not know where to place it. Rumors carry the weight that facts cannot. A stranger from a ship. A jealous lover. A roving drifter. Theories swirl. The strap gathers dust. Years pass. Detectives retire. Downtown changes. A cold case unit forms. Detective Mara Kline pulls the Cartwright box from the shelf during an audit. She lists each item. She lingers on the strap. "Send it," she says. The evidence tech raises an eyebrow. It is old. It is degraded. "Send it." At the lab, a technician teases a trace from the weave. It is tiny. It is stubborn. It is enough. When the report arrives, Kline reads it twice. She calls Chief Duarte. They loop in the prosecutor. They call Morin, the genealogist. He starts the tree that same night. The tree looks like a river delta drawn in pencil. Moran moves branch by branch. He fills names. He adds towns. He adds years. He finds a male line that fits the alleles and the map and the date. He circles a single box. Rusk. Stakeout. Rain on windshields. A long lens catches routine. Coffee at 7. A truck bed full of lumber at 9. A grocery run at 5. Rusk lives like any other man on that street. A detective retrieves a cup from a trash can. Chain of custody begins with a zip bag and a signature. The lab runs the test. The strap profile meets the cup profile. They shake hands like old friends. Kline writes the warrant affidavit in tight lines. She hands it to a judge who has seen many warrants and signed most of them. She nods once when he signs this one. The arrest is quiet. Rusk says 5 words at intake. "You people never forget anything." They search his house. They find a box of photographs. Most are landscapes and job sites. One frame stops a detective's hand. It shows the waterfront from near Pier 57. The angle matches the spot where Lena's car was found. The negative is missing. Is it a coincidence? Is it a trophy? Evidence does not answer that question. Not yet. Reporters gather outside headquarters. A boom mic dips. Chief Duarte reads the statement again for television. She thanks the lab. She thanks the genealogy team. She thanks the detectives who kept turning a key that did not want to turn. Commentators start the cycle. Podcasts push episodes overnight. Timelines appear. Threads map every rumor from 1991 against the name Daniel Rusk. Theories grow arms. The case turns into content. But the people at the center are not content. They are a family. Ruth keeps the phone close. She pours coffee she does not drink. She walks to her daughter's old room, even though that room is 2 cities away and 3 decades gone. She touches a framed photo of Lena, holding the AE, one with the red tape. She says the same line she said when the body was found. "I will not let you be only a headline." Detective Kline watches the booking screen flicker. She has worked other arrests. This one feels different. She knows they will have to explain forensic genealogy to a jury in simple words. What it is, how it works, and why it matters. She rehearses it out loud in her office. "It is not a database match," she says. "It is a family map that points to a living person. We confirm with a standard test. We rule out innocent contact." They know the counter-arguments. Defense will say, touch DNA travels. Defense will say a contractor might have brushed a camera by chance. So detectives build context. Rusk worked maintenance near the pier in 1991. He lived within a short drive of both the car and the body site. His routine intersected with the places that mattered. The strap sample is not casual transfer. It is a sweat trace embedded deep in the weave. It is the kind of residue that comes from grip. Science says so. Inside the jail, Rusk stares at a concrete block wall. He has no record. He coached Little League. He shoveled snow for the block when he was younger, and winters were harder. He built porches and stairs and fences you could lean on. He passed neighbors on sidewalks and said good morning. No one saw a shadow in him. Maybe they did not look. Maybe there was nothing to see until now. Outside, rain begins. Seattle looks like an old photograph when it rains. Edges soften. Colors turn to ash. Voices get quiet. Lena's name trends for the first time in years. New residents learn it for the first time. Old residents whisper it again. Bars that once played her favorite bands now stream the news on loop. Screens show Rusk in handcuffs. Screens show a detective at a podium. Screens show a ghost city from 1991. At arraignment, the charge is read. Murder in the first degree. Count one only. A judge sets the calendar. The prosecutor does not rush the podium. They have waited this long. They will build this right. People ask about motive. Detectives hate that word. They prefer opportunity and means and evidence that breathes. If Lena photographed something she was not supposed to see, that is one possibility. If a stranger turned out not to be a stranger at all, that is another. They know better than to guess into a microphone. They let the affidavit speak. They let the strap speak. The strap sits on a metal table in a clean room. A tech points with a gloved finger at the place where science found a whisper. The tech explains the method in one line. We wash time off the fibers. That is not the technical phrase. It is the true one. What changed after years? Technique. Access. A detective who said, "Send it anyway." A genealogist who followed a map on paper until it became a name on a warrant. Seattle exhales. Only a little. Justice is not a bow. It is a door that opens onto another room. There are hearings to come. There will be a trial if the court agrees the science stands. There will be challenges and charts and questions about probability. There will be a family sitting in the first row. If you like cases where one overlooked clue flips a whole town, you are in the right place. But to understand this moment, we need to go back to where it began. Seattle, 1991. A city between two eras. The skyline still belonged to cranes and rain clouds. The coffee boom was just beginning, the music scene rumbling underground, and the tech money had not yet arrived to polish the edges. The air smelled like salt, espresso, and wet cedar. Everywhere, you could hear the low hum of a city trying to define itself. And in the middle of it was Lena Cartwright, 23 years old, camera always at her hip. If you lived in the city back then, Belltown, Capitol Hill, Ballard, you'd probably seen her and not known it. A small woman with short brown hair and a denim jacket, crouching to catch a reflection in a puddle or the curve of light across a bus window. Her landlord said she took pictures of ordinary things. But that was the point. Lena wanted to make ordinary sacred. She rented a tiny walk-up on Dexter Avenue, 3rd floor. One window faced the Space Needle, though the view was half blocked by a mess of telephone lines. Rent was $300 a month, heat included if the radiators decided to cooperate. Inside, the apartment smelled faintly of fixer chemicals and old books. One wall was covered in pinned contact sheets, each marked with grease pencil notes. Keep, crop tighter, too soft. The neighbors called her polite, quiet, sometimes distant. She worked nights at a photo lab near Pike Place to pay the bills and freelanced for the Seattle Herald whenever she could land an assignment. She liked stories that required walking city features, neighborhood portraits, anything that let her move through crowds unnoticed. Her editor, Tom Perez, said she had an eye for ghosts. He meant she could find beauty where others found nothing. Friends said she carried 2 cameras, the Canon AE, one she trusted, and a cheap disposable she gave to people she met so they could photograph her in return. On the back of each print, she'd write their name, date, and one line about where it happened. Her way of reminding herself she was part of the story too. Her mother, Ruth, lived across the state in Spokane. They spoke every Sunday morning, no exceptions. Lena called from her kitchen phone, cord stretched across the counter, coffee steaming beside the receiver. She'd talk about photo deadlines, about her roommate moving out, about the pigeons that lived in the eaves of her building. The calls usually ended the same way. Ruth would say, "Be careful out there." Lena would laugh and say, "You know me, Mom. I'm invisible." In her notebooks, Ruth found that line written once, months before the murder. A page filled with short thoughts, half-formed captions, a mixture of poetry and inventory. Rain on film, 3 stops under. Man sleeping at bus stop wants to tell a joke. Invisible is not the same as safe. Those words became part of the file later, after the crime. Detectives used them in the timeline, unsure whether they meant anything or everything. That spring, Lena was working on a personal series she called Vanishing Corners. It was about the places that were disappearing: old warehouses, empty lots, mom-and-pop storefronts, swallowed by redevelopment. Her professor at North Seattle College, Dr. Haney, said it was documentary nostalgia, though he meant it as a compliment. She said she wanted to capture what the city looked like before it forgot itself. On May 9th, she checked out film stock from the lab and signed her initials on the supply sheet, L.C. 2 rolls of Kodak Tri-X, 1 of color Ektachrome. She planned to spend the weekend photographing the waterfront before a construction project sealed off Pier 57. That's the last line in the log with her name on it. People who knew Lena describe her as focused to the point of stubbornness. When she wanted a shot, nothing distracted her. She once spent an entire night photographing reflections in puddles after a storm, waiting for a neon sign to flicker at the right moment. By the time she finished, dawn was rising and her hands were shaking from cold. Her roommate, Joan, told police later, that was Lena. She'd chase a photograph like it was a person she loved. Joan was the last person to see her alive inside that apartment. It was Friday, May 10th. Lena had dinner early, leftover noodles, and told Joan she'd be out near the waterfront until late. She packed her camera bag, zipped her jacket, and said, "If I'm not back by midnight, I found a good shot." Joan smiled. She'd heard that line before. Outside, the fog was thick enough to blur headlights. Buses hissed along Mercer Street. She walked toward the water with her gear slung crossbody, boots tapping on wet pavement. Somewhere between 10 p.m. and midnight, she vanished. Back then, Seattle was a patchwork of neighborhoods stitched together by dark industrial zones. The pier area where she worked that night was in transition, half tourist attraction, half forgotten dockside. Barges rattled the planks when they passed. Streetlights flickered. The air carried a mix of brine and diesel. It was a place that swallowed sound. Witnesses were scarce. A dock worker later told police he'd seen a woman matching her description taking photos near the chain-link fence by Warehouse 12, around 9:45 p.m. He remembered the flash. He remembered her crouching low, then standing, camera strap across her neck. He didn't see anyone else nearby. He didn't hear a struggle. Just the sound of the camera shutter and the low hum of a generator. When the news broke about her death 2 days later, Seattle froze. It was the first time many residents realized how vulnerable their growing city could feel. She wasn't a runaway. She wasn't mixed up in anything dark. She was one of them, young, ambitious, hopeful. At the Seattle Herald, her colleagues put her last photograph on the front page, a shot of seagulls circling above an empty pier. The caption read simply, "Untitled, May 1991. For months afterward, people left flowers at the waterfront. Someone taped one of her photos to a light pole with the words, "She saw us." Detective Mara Kline, who would inherit the case decades later, wasn't even a cop then. She was in high school in Everett, reading about the murder in the paper over breakfast. She remembered the image, the grainy black and white of Lena's face, and thinking it looked like someone who could have been her older sister. That thought stuck. Years later, when she reopened the cold case, she taped that same clipping to her desk. The original investigation struggled from the start. There were no security cameras, no digital footprints, no cell phone pings to trace. All they had were the physical traces, the car, the strap, the prints that didn't match anyone in the system. Theories changed weekly. A transient, a jealous ex, a random drifter. Nothing fit. Seattle moved on, but not entirely. Every few years, a local columnist wrote a retrospective. Still unsolved, the headlines would read. Readers would send letters, some offering theories, others simply saying they hadn't forgotten. What makes Lena's story different is how vividly she existed in the city's collective memory. Her photographs outlived her. They were displayed posthumously at a student gallery that fall. People lined up to see them, not because they were technically brilliant, but because they felt like pieces of the city itself. Rust, rain, reflections, alleys. Every print looked like a memory someone else might have had. Her professor wrote a note beside the exhibit. These images remind us that the world disappears, whether or not someone is watching. But she was watching. Ruth Cartwright kept all of Lena's negatives in a shoebox under her bed. When detectives returned them after evidence review, she couldn't bring herself to look at them again. She left the box sealed for decades, tape yellowing at the edges. When the 2024 arrest happened, she finally opened it. Inside was everything she remembered: the early experiments, the portraits, the street shots. All numbered, all neat. Except one missing roll. The final roll. The one that was never developed. The one Lena had shot that night by the pier. Detectives never found it. It wasn't with the camera. It wasn't at the scene. It wasn't in her apartment. That absence became legend. Podcasts called it the missing frame. Some said it captured her killer. Others believed it was lost to the tide, film dissolving into saltwater decades ago. Even now, it's the question no one can quite let go. As Seattle modernized, the physical traces of Lena's world disappeared. The lot, where her body was found, became part of a light rail expansion. The pier where her car was discovered turned into a parking lot for a new museum. Only the fog stayed the same. By the time Detective Kline reopened the case, most original witnesses had moved or died. Files were digitized, photographs rescanned. But the voice in the reports, Lena's world, the people, the feel, was gone. To understand it, Kline drove the old routes herself. Dexter Avenue to the waterfront. The curve past the rail yards. She parked where the pier used to stand and listened. You can't hear ghosts, but sometimes you can feel the shape they left behind. What the city lost with Lena wasn't just a life. It lost a mirror. Her photographs were the kind that showed people what they overlooked. A reflection in a puddle, a kid's drawing on a boarded window, graffiti that read, "We were here." When she died, those corners disappeared faster. The fairy tale of Seattle as a safe, small city cracked. And for years afterward, the name Cartwright was shorthand for something fragile that had broken. Even as decades passed, a few people kept rituals. Every May 10th, a flower appeared at the edge of the old pier, laid quietly at dawn. No one ever saw who left it. Detectives suspected Ruth, though she lived 4 hours away. She said she never returned to that spot. But someone did. Someone always did. In 2024, when news of Rusk's arrest broke, the city reacted like it was personal. People who hadn't been born when Lena died posted her images on social media. Old neighbors came forward to tell reporters they remembered her smile, her camera, the red tape on the grip. A few still swore they saw her that night, memory playing tricks after 33 years. For Ruth, the arrest was both an ending and a reminder. She told the local paper, "They caught him, but I still don't have her." She folded the article neatly, slid it into the same shoebox with the negatives, and closed the lid. The missing roll of film remains unaccounted for. Maybe it's buried in some forgotten box of junk at a thrift store. Maybe it sank into the mud beneath the pier, emulsion stripped away by salt and time. Maybe, just maybe, it's still out there somewhere waiting for light. That's the story of Lena Cartwright, before she became a headline. A woman chasing light through a gray city, capturing what it was before it became what it is now. Her life measured not in years, but in frames. Her final photograph missing. Her story unfinished. Friday, May 10th, 1991. Seattle wakes under a low ceiling of fog. It's the kind of morning when everything sounds closer. Buses groan. Gulls echo through the mist. Footsteps multiply. Some people call it romantic weather. Lena Cartwright calls it perfect light. She's up early. The clock on her kitchen counter blinks 7:18. Coffee steams beside a stack of contact sheets from the week before, street scenes from Pioneer Square, reflections on wet pavement, a frame she's marked with a grease pencil note, almost there. The radio hums with static, then music, then a news anchor reading weather for the weekend. High 50s. Rain likely. She writes one word in her notebook, pier, then underlines it twice. Her morning follows ritual. A walk to the corner market for film and a carton of milk. She waves to the clerk, the same one who always jokes that she should photograph something cheerful for once. She laughs and says, "The light decides that, not me." At the bus stop, she flips through her notebook, jotting locations. Rail yards, Pier 57, Occidental Ave mural. Her handwriting is small and steady, the pen lines pressed deep enough to leave impressions on the next page. The bus rattles downtown. Out the window, cranes loom above the fog line like half-built skeletons. Seattle is changing, but not fast enough for anyone to notice day to day. Lena notices. That's what she's trying to capture, the in-between, the almost gone. At the photo lab near Pike Place, the smell of fixer clings to everything. Her boss, Al Sanders, is developing wedding prints in the darkroom when she arrives. He calls out without turning around. "You're early again, Cartwright. You trying to own the place?" She smiles. "Just stealing some time before the light goes bad." He reminds her to clock her hours, says he can't keep covering overtime. She promises she will. Before leaving, she grabs 3 rolls of Tri-X film from the supply drawer and signs her initials on the checkout sheet, L.C., the same signature that later anchors the police timeline. At 2:12 p.m., she places a quick call from the lab phone to her mother in Spokane. It lasts 3 minutes. They talk about the weather, about her mother's new garden, about nothing much at all. Ruth tells her, "You sound happy." Lena says, "I am. It's a good light day." It's the last time they speak. Back home, Lena changes film bags, packs her camera gear, and slips her wallet and notebook into the side pocket. Joan, her roommate, is heading out for the evening shift at a restaurant on Denny Way. She leans against the doorframe while Lena checks her lenses. "You going hunting again?" Lena nods. Pier 57 before they close the walkway. Joan asks if she wants company. Lena shakes her head. "You'll ruin my composition." They both laugh. Joan will remember that line for the rest of her life. At 5:47 p.m., a neighbor named Eddie Chung sees her leaving the building. She's wearing jeans, boots, a faded green jacket, and a messenger bag slung across her chest. He notices the red tape wrapped around her camera grip. He'll mention that detail later in his statement, after seeing it in news coverage and realizing it mattered. The drive downtown takes 10 minutes. She parks her teal hatchback in a public lot near the pier, a few spaces from a row of maintenance trucks. Receipts later confirm she paid for 2 hours of parking at 6:03 p.m. From there, the timeline thins. At 6:40 p.m., a couple walking near the waterfront recalls seeing a young woman taking pictures of cranes against the setting sun. They describe her as focused, almost still. At 7:15, a fisherman unloading gear from his truck sees her standing by the chain-link fence near Warehouse 12. He remembers her looking through the viewfinder, then writing something in a small notebook. He notices someone else nearby, a man, tall, wearing a gray work jacket, though he can't recall if they spoke. The detail doesn't make it into the first reports. No one asks him until weeks later, when memory is already a fog of its own. Around 8:30, fog begins rolling back in from the sound, thick enough to dull the neon signs along Alaskan Way. She keeps shooting anyway. Photographs from her last developed roll show reflections in wet asphalt, the faint glow of fairy lights, a blurred figure walking away into haze. The next roll, the one never recovered, would have started just after that. She stops briefly at a payphone outside a diner. The call lasts less than a minute. Records show it was to her apartment. Joan had already left for work. No message was left. Police later suggest she might have been checking her watch schedule with a friend or planning to meet someone. No one knows for sure. By 9 p.m., the pier is almost empty. Vendors close their stalls. Generators hum. A single streetlight flickers above the lot where her car is parked. She changes film, sliding a fresh roll into the cannon. A man passes by, pushing a dolly stacked with crates. She says something, maybe sorry, as she steps aside. He nods and keeps walking. It's an ordinary moment that becomes the last confirmed sighting. The next 90 minutes vanish from record. At 11:20 p.m., her car is still there. A parking enforcement officer logs its license plate as part of a routine sweep. Nothing looks out of place. No broken glass. No sign of struggle. The car door is locked. The ticket placed on the windshield becomes a timestamp, the final proof of presence. At midnight, Joan returns home. The apartment is quiet. Lena's bed is empty, her camera bag gone. That isn't unusual. Sometimes she stays out late printing or chasing the right exposure. Joan makes tea, reads for a while, and goes to bed around 1 a.m. She'll wake at 7 to an empty apartment and a sense she can't explain, a feeling that something is wrong. Saturday morning. The phone rings at 9:12. It's Lena's editor, Tom Perez, asking if she's submitted the weekend shots. Joan says she hasn't seen her since the night before. Perez assumes she's still out shooting. He tells Joan to have her call when she gets in. That call never happens. By evening, concern turns into panic. Perez calls the photo lab, no answer. He calls her mother, who hasn't heard from her since Friday afternoon. By 10 p.m., they contact police to file a missing person report. The initial response is cautious. Adults disappear all the time, they say. Give it a day. But Joan insists. She doesn't just disappear, she documents. Detective Robert Madsen, on night shift, takes the report. He drives to the apartment, looks around the tidy room, the camera negatives pinned on the wall, the notebook on the desk. He notes the detail that the bed appears untouched, toothbrush still dry. He writes in his report, no signs of forced entry or disturbance, possible voluntary absence. Still, he feels uneasy. Something about the precision of her space, the orderliness, tells him this isn't a person who leaves things half done. They issue a bolo for the teal hatchback anyway. It's found the next morning near Pier 57, right where she parked it. Engine cold. Ticket still under the wiper. Inside, her camera bag, open. No camera, no film, no notebook. Only the strap, looped through the passenger seat handle, ends torn clean. It looks almost staged, like a photograph arranged for meaning. Madsen calls for backup. By noon Sunday, the pier is sealed. Search dogs brought in from Tacoma trace her scent from the car toward the edge of the dock, then lose it by the fence near Warehouse 12. Divers check the water. Nothing. A grid search expands through nearby lots and alleyways. The city feels smaller, colder, tighter. By Monday morning, local TV picks up the story. Young photographer, missing near Seattle waterfront. The picture they use is one of her self-portraits, Lena smiling slightly, sunlight glancing off her hair. Reporters call her bright, ambitious, beloved. No one calls her what she was, careful. Tuesday, May 14th. A city worker doing maintenance near the rail yards spots something pale in the weeds beyond the fence line. He thinks it's a sheet of plastic. It isn't. Lena Cartwright is found face down in the grass, less than half a mile from where her car was parked. There's no camera, no film, just the strap imprint, faint on her neck. The medical examiner rules cause of death as asphyxiation. No signs of sexual assault. No defensive wounds. It's as if the life was taken neatly, deliberately, without chaos. Detectives swarm the area. They find tire tracks in the mud, but can't identify make or model. A cigarette butt nearby yields no usable prints. They bag everything, even the smallest pieces, unsure what might matter. When the evidence tech lifts the camera strap into a clear plastic bag, no one realizes they're holding the key. The weave glints faintly in the sun, still damp from dew. It looks ordinary. It looks like nothing. The next week becomes a blur of press conferences, leads, and grief. Seattle hasn't had a case like this in years. The public demands answers. Police chase rumors, a transient, a dock worker, a jealous ex. Nothing fits. Ruth arrives from Spokane to identify her daughter's belongings. In the evidence room, she pauses over the strap, fingertips brushing the plastic. She asks if they found the camera. Detective Madsen shakes his head. Maybe it was stolen, Ruth says quietly. She would never give up a camera. That line makes it into every story afterward. The funeral is small. Friends, colleagues, classmates, a few detectives standing at the back. A framed photo sits on the altar, the same one from the paper. Outside, drizzle softens the edges of the crowd. The pastor says Lena saw the world through grace. Ruth doesn't speak. Joan reads one of Lena's notebook lines instead. Light is proof that something is still here, even when we can't see it. When the service ends, Detective Madsen slips Ruth his card. He promises to keep looking. She nods but doesn't believe him. Not yet. Years later, when Mara Kline reopens the file, she studies those first 72 hours over and over. The photos, the receipts, the payphone record. She pins them on her board in chronological order, draws red strings for each confirmed sighting, blue for unconfirmed. At the center, she tapes the image of the strap. She traces it with her finger and whispers to the empty room, "You're the only witness." That was Lena's last normal day, ordinary, meticulous, full of purpose. A walk, a bus ride, a photograph. The city didn't know that by the time the fog lifted, one of its brightest eyes had closed. Next comes the panic, the search that swallowed half the waterfront, the rumors that never stopped, and the silence that stretched for 3 decades until one fiber of that strap finally spoke. Sunday, May 12, 1991. Just after sunrise. Fog hangs low over the waterfront, thicker than usual, curling between piers like smoke. The air is cold enough to sting when you breathe it in. Down by Pier 57, gulls circle the empty parking lot, scavenging for scraps left from the night before. A maintenance worker named Joe Navarro arrives for his shift. He's early, as always. He kills the engine, steps out, and stretches. That's when he notices the teal hatchback. It's parked at an odd angle, driver's side facing the water, one tire pressed hard against the concrete bumper. He thinks maybe a drunk left it overnight. Then he sees the parking ticket under the wiper, dated Friday night. 2 days old. He peers through the window. The seats are dry, no sign of forced entry. But the passenger door handle has something looped around it, fabric, maybe a strap. When he leans closer, he sees the break in the weave, the jagged edge of torn nylon. He steps back, uneasy. Calls it in. At 8:47 a.m., Patrol Car 42 responds. Officer Gail Mendoza logs arrival at the scene. She notes in her report, "Vehicle appears abandoned. 2-day-old citation on windshield. Possible connection to missing person case filed previous night." By 9 o'clock, detectives are notified. Mendoza sets up a loose perimeter, tapes off the immediate area. Seagulls watch from the railings like an audience. The hatchback is ordinary in every way, dirt-specked, coffee cup in the console, a cassette labeled Talking Heads, half ejected from the stereo. Keys still in the ignition. No wallet. No camera. Just the open bag on the seat. Inside, the lining smells faintly of sea air and fixer chemical, the scent that clings to photo gear. Mendoza snaps Polaroids, marking each angle. When she lifts the strap with gloved hands, it sticks slightly to the vinyl, the torn end stiffened by moisture. She drops it into an evidence bag, seals it. Her note on the label reads, "Camera strap, possibly broken, fibers damp." The irony is immediate. The only surviving piece of Lena's work is the thing meant to hold her camera. Detective Robert Madsen arrives at 9:30. He's 49, methodical, the kind of cop who still carries a notepad instead of a tape recorder. He's seen runaways, suicides, drunks in alleys. But something about this one feels off, too neat, too quiet. He circles the car twice. The driver's seat is pushed forward. Lena wasn't tall, but the setting is slightly farther back than expected. He makes a note. He crouches, eyes the mud near the tires. 2 partial shoe impressions, one smaller, one larger. No clear tread. He calls for forensics anyway. When the techs arrive, he steps aside, watching. They dust the handles for prints. They collect the strap. They scrape the inside of the cup for residue. It's all logged and bagged, though no one expects much. The waterfront eats evidence. Salt, rain, time, each one erases truth faster than paper can record it. By late morning, word spreads. Reporters show up before noon, drawn by scanner chatter. They photograph the taped-off car, the officers moving deliberately, the fog burning off in strips as sunlight breaks through. A local news anchor records a stand-up. Authorities believe this vehicle may belong to 23-year-old photographer Lena Cartwright, missing since Friday night. Behind her, Madsen glances toward the camera, expression blank. He doesn't like the circus. He knows how fast stories twist once they leave his control. Still, he understands the attention means pressure, and sometimes, pressure shakes loose the truth. By 1 p.m., the body hasn't been found yet. They don't know how close she is. They don't know that she's lying less than a mile south, hidden by grass and the curve of a fence line. For now, all they have is a car and a strap that seems to mean nothing. Inside the evidence trailer, the air is heavy with chemical smell. Techs photograph, label, and inventory the contents. A receipt for gas purchased at 5:55 p.m., Friday. A notebook containing film stock numbers, but no current entries. A single film canister, exposed but unprocessed, sitting loose in the glove box. Madsen writes, possible last roll beside it in the chain of custody log. Later analysis shows it's from Thursday, not Friday. Images of storefronts and street musicians, ordinary days that would become extraordinary only by contrast. He sets the strap on the metal table. Up close, it looks frayed but not violently torn, almost as if cut or worn down by tension. He frowns. Could have snagged on something, the tech says. Or someone pulled it hard. They bag it and move on. At the precinct that afternoon, Madsen briefs Chief Ray Sutton, who's already juggling reporters and phone calls from the mayor's office. They need a narrative, something to tell the public. Madsen resists that urge. There's no story yet, he says. Only missing pieces. Sutton nods but goes on camera anyway. He tells the press the department is exploring all possibilities. He assures them they're working closely with the family. He avoids saying what everyone already fears. That night, police widen the search. They bring in dogs again, starting from the parking lot where the car was found. Handlers give them a jacket from Lena's apartment to catch her scent. The dogs pull south, toward the rail yards. They follow the fence line until the trail fades. The handlers mark the spot with orange tape and keep going. The next morning, Monday, a maintenance crew working near those same tracks sees movement in the weeds. They assume it's an animal. It isn't. Madsen gets the call at 7:12 a.m. He drives with lights off, not because of stealth but because of dread. When he arrives, paramedics are already there, silent, waiting for instructions. The body is partially hidden, clothing damp from morning dew. The camera is missing. The strap mark is faint, but visible across her neck. He steps back, exhales. Even after 20 years on the job, the first sight never gets easier. He notes position, surroundings, possible drag patterns. Nothing conclusive. No struggle, no scattering of items. Just stillness. Almost reverence. He kneels beside her for a moment before the photographers arrive. He doesn't touch anything. He just says softly, "We'll find him." He doesn't know who him is yet, but he's already certain it isn't random. Forensics sweeps the area. They collect soil, fibers, hair strands, anything with potential. A single cigarette butt is bagged. A denim thread caught on the chain-link fence nearby goes in another envelope. They don't know yet how important that tiny blue thread will be. It will sit in storage for decades, until science learns to speak its language. They photograph tire tracks in the mud, though rain overnight has blurred their edges. No impressions clear enough to cast. No tool marks. No signs of a weapon. When they move the body, a silver ring slips from her hand, a simple band with an engraving inside. Light remains. Her mother confirms it later. A gift from a college friend. By noon, the press knows. Helicopters circle overhead, sound drowning out the investigators' voices. Reporters cluster at the barricade, shouting questions. Someone leaks the discovery to the Seattle Herald. By evening, the front page carries the headline, "Body found near pier area believed to be missing photographer." Ruth Cartwright reads it alone in a motel room on Mercer Street. She had arrived in town hours earlier to help post flyers. Now, there is no one left to find. Detectives brief her in person. She listens without interrupting, eyes fixed on the strap inside its plastic sleeve. When Madsen explains where it was found, she says quietly, "She never let that camera go. Whoever tore that off, he meant to stop her from seeing. Madsen writes it in his notes verbatim. Later, he'll tell his trainees it was the truest thing anyone said in the case. That evening, the scene is cleared. The pier returns to silence. Fog rolls back in, heavier than the night before. You could walk there then and never guess what happened. Just another quiet patch of waterfront with gulls overhead and the smell of diesel rising from the sound. But under the concrete, fragments remain, microscopic traces that time hasn't fully erased. Skin cells pressed into nylon fibers. A story written in sweat and friction, waiting 33 years to be read. The next days blur into interviews and lab reports. Dozens of dockworkers questioned, none detained. Carnival employees working a nearby event investigated, cleared. No fingerprints match the strap or the car. The cigarette butt yields partial DNA, but the technology can't use it yet. They log it anyway. Ruth returns home to Spokane after the funeral. She leaves Madsen a note that says, "Please, don't let her disappear again." He pins it above his desk. In a storage room beneath the precinct, a clerk files the evidence boxes by year. He slides the one labeled Cartwright, L. 1991 between two others. Inside, the strap rests in its sealed bag, beside film canisters and negatives, their paper labels yellowing. The clerk shuts the cabinet, locks it, and walks away. Decades pass. The city changes. The cabinet remains. Dust gathers. And in that dust, the case waits patient, silent, undefeated by time. The scene fades from public memory, but it never leaves the department. Every detective who walks through the cold case unit sees the name on the spine of the file. Some pull it, read a few pages, then set it back. Others make promises to reopen it one day. None succeed until Detective Mara Kline arrives and refuses to let it go. In her first week on the job, she finds that same box in the evidence room. She unseals it, gloved hands trembling slightly. The strap is still there, still sealed in the original bag, still marked with Mendoza's handwriting. She holds it to the light. There's nothing visible, no stain, no color change, just ordinary fabric. But she knows what history has taught her. Ordinary isn't empty. She places it on her desk, next to the case file, and writes one line in her notebook. Start with what she touched last. That single decision, one old strap, one new test, will pull the past into the present and change the city forever. The news hit Seattle like thunder rolling across the sound. By Monday evening, the murder of Lena Cartwright was on every television, every radio, every front page. Her face, soft smile, camera strap visible in the corner of the frame, became the city's ghost overnight. It wasn't just another crime. It was a violation of the image Seattle carried of itself: safe, creative, restless but kind. Now, that illusion cracked, and out poured fear. At the precinct, Detective Robert Madsen ran on coffee and no sleep. His desk was a sea of phone messages. Every few minutes, another possible sighting, another lead. He logged them all. He already knew most would go nowhere. Reporters swarmed the lobby, their voices echoing down the hallway. One shouted through the glass, "Detective, do you believe this was random?" Madsen didn't answer. He just closed his door. Outside, the city pulsed with unease. Women who had once walked home along the piers now traveled in pairs. Newspapers sold out at corner stands, the front page headlines screaming, "Killer at large photographer's death shocks, Seattle." Talk radio lit up. Hosts speculated about drifters, serial predators, satanic cults, whatever filled airtime. Each theory, once spoken, became rumor. And rumor moved faster than fact. Ruth Cartwright stayed in town that week. The department put her in a hotel near Pioneer Square. She didn't sleep. She didn't eat much either. When Madsen stopped by to check on her, she sat by the window, staring out at the skyline she'd once thought her daughter loved. She called this city her subject, Ruth said. She wanted to make it look human. Madsen didn't know what to say. He handed her a copy of the press statement instead. It listed, "No suspects, investigation ongoing." She folded it in half and set it beside the lamp. "She's still out there somewhere," she whispered, meaning not Lena, but whoever had taken her. By midweek, the The department threw everything they had at the case. 30 officers assigned full-time, 12-hour shifts. Crime scene photos tacked across corkboards in a windowless briefing room. Maps marked with red pins showing witness statements, search zones, and recovered evidence. The dogs went back out on Tuesday. They traced the scent from the rail yard where Lena's body was found, up toward the parking lot, then east for half a mile, before losing it near the old freight access road. That route pointed away from the water, toward industrial lots and warehouses, places perfect for vanishing. Officers canvassed each one. They found cigarette butts, footprints, a crushed beer can. Nothing useful. Volunteers joined in. By Wednesday, more than 200 people had signed up to help search. Students, dock workers, photographers who knew Lena, even strangers who just wanted to do something. They moved in a slow grid, shoulder to shoulder, combing through overgrown lots, ditches, and wooded areas south of downtown. The image made the evening news. A line of people stretching across an empty field, fog curling around their ankles, calling her name, even though they already knew. One reporter described it as a city trying to unbury itself. He wasn't wrong. Every night, the volunteers met at a makeshift command center in a warehouse donated by a local business. The air smelled like coffee and exhaustion. Madsen briefed them on progress, always careful not to promise too much. He told them what to look for: the missing camera, the notebook, any roll of undeveloped film. He knew they wouldn't find them, but hope was the currency keeping the search alive. Joan, Lena's roommate, became a fixture at the command center. She printed hundreds of flyers on borrowed machines, her fingers blackened with ink. At one point, she told a reporter, "It doesn't feel real. I keep thinking she's just working late, and I'll hear her keys in the door." When asked what she wanted people to know about Lena, she paused. That she saw things we didn't. She saw the beauty in the broken parts of this city. That quote ran on page 2 of the Seattle Herald beneath her photo. It turned Lena from a victim into a symbol. And once that happens, reality gets harder to separate from story. By Friday, detectives had interviewed nearly 60 people. Longshoremen, night security guards, maintenance workers from the pier. One name kept surfacing: Daniel Rusk. At the time, he was just another contractor, one of dozens who'd done repairs on the waterfront that spring. He told police he'd been home by 8 p.m., Friday night. His wife confirmed the alibi. They let him go. No one looked at him twice. His name was entered, then forgotten. The department called in the state crime lab to help. Technicians processed the car again, this time under ultraviolet light. They found faint traces of partial prints on the door handle, too smudged to match. Fibers on the seat were analyzed: cotton, wool, nothing unusual. The strap was examined, photographed, logged, then sealed away. It showed a single faint streak of salt, sweat, or seawater. No one could say. Madsen told reporters, "We're confident this case will be solved." He didn't believe it. The funeral had come and gone, but the public vigil kept growing. Every evening at dusk, people gathered near the pier, lighting candles that flickered against the wind. Someone placed one of Lena's prints, Gulls, over Market Street beneath a streetlight. Others brought flowers, taped photographs to the fence. The scene became a shrine. Cameramen filmed it from every angle, the candles shimmering in puddles. A producer whispered to her crew, she'd probably have loved this light. It was a cruel irony. Inside the department, frustration built. Chief Sutton held press briefings that offered nothing new. Theories piled up like dead ends. A transient from the docks. A jealous ex-boyfriend. A passing motorist. Each theory generated tips. Each tip led nowhere. Madsen started dreaming of the case file. He'd wake at 3 a.m., certain he'd missed something. Once, he even drove back to the pier in the middle of the night, flashlight in hand, pacing the concrete where her car had been. He found nothing, but the smell of salt and rust stuck to him for days. Ruth left Seattle on the 10th day. Before she went, she stopped by the precinct to thank the detectives. Her voice was calm, too calm. She handed Madsen a small envelope. Inside was a black and white photo of Lena at age 7, holding her first camera. "Keep her close," she said. He pinned it to his corkboard and left it there until he retired. The case stalled by summer. Without witnesses, without evidence, it became static, another line in the cold case ledger. But in those first 2 weeks, Seattle had felt something rare: collective grief. It was like the whole city had lost someone it knew personally. For months afterward, whenever fog rolled over the waterfront, people said her name under their breath. Not out of superstition, but out of guilt. Because if a young woman with a camera could vanish from a crowded pier and no one noticed, what did that say about everyone else? In late June, the department quietly scaled back resources. The search headquarters closed. The volunteers went home. The flyers came down, edges curling from rain. The pier reopened to the public. Ferries docked. Tourists returned. Life moved on, at least on the surface. But beneath that, something lingered, a feeling that the city had failed to protect one of its own. Parents warned daughters not to go out alone. Women clutched their keys between their fingers, walking to their cars. And for a generation of Seattleites, the name Cartwright became shorthand for fear. Detective Madsen stayed on the case for another 3 years before retirement. Every few months, he'd reopen the file, reread the witness statements, stare at the photographs of the car, the strap, the empty passenger seat. He'd always stop at one note scribbled in the margin. If the strap was torn, why was it clean? He circled it twice, then closed the folder. That question would remain unanswered until the 21st century, when new eyes, new tools, and a new kind of science would pick up where his ended. For now, Seattle exhaled, tired and uneasy. The fog rolled back in. The candlelight at the pier dimmed. And somewhere in a storage cabinet deep inside the evidence room, the strap sat sealed in its plastic bag, quiet, patient, holding onto the sweat of the man who had once gripped it too hard. Waiting for someone, someday, to listen. Seattle, 2024. 33 years after the night, the city lost a girl with a camera. For most people, Lena Cartwright had become a story, one of those names whispered when the fog rolled in over Elliott Bay. But for Detective Mara Kline, she was still a file on the corner of her desk, still a voice waiting to be heard. And now, finally, that voice was speaking. The DNA test results arrived in May. A match. A perfect, uncontested, statistically impossible to deny match. The old camera strap, the one bagged by Officer Mendoza in 1991, had yielded a degraded sample of epithelial cells. Half a lifetime later, forensic genealogy had turned that invisible residue into a family tree. 3 second cousins. 1 great-nephew. All traced to a man named Daniel Rusk, age 58, living quietly in Shoreline, Washington. When Kline first saw the name, she thought it looked familiar. Then she checked the old case notes. He'd been there all along. A construction worker on the pier that spring. Interviewed once, cleared, forgotten. His statement back then was 5 lines long. Worked until 7, went home, didn't see anything. That was it. For 33 years, those 5 lines sat in a file while his DNA sat in plain sight. The morning of the arrest was gray, like most in Seattle. Kline and 2 plainclothes detectives waited in an unmarked car outside Rusk's split-level home. He came out at 7:42 a.m., coffee mug in hand, unaware that the past was about to knock. When she stepped from the vehicle and said his name, he blinked like he'd misheard. Then he looked down and saw the badge. Something in his face shifted, not shock, not guilt, just a quiet resignation, as if he'd been waiting for this knock all along. "Daniel Rusk," she said, voice even. "You're under arrest for the murder of Lena Cartwright." He didn't resist. He just handed her the coffee cup, like he didn't know what else to do with his hands. At headquarters, Kline sat across from him in the interview room. He looked smaller in person. Broad-shouldered once, but softened by time. His hair gray, hands calloused. He spoke in a slow, measured voice, the kind used by men who've spent years working with tools. He asked if this was about the pier job. She told him it was about a camera strap. He went quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice cracked. "I didn't mean to kill her." He said it like he'd rehearsed it, like he'd been waiting to say it to someone who'd believe him. Rusk's story came out in fragments, each one heavier than the last. He'd met Lena weeks before her death. She'd been photographing the waterfront redevelopment site where he was working. He said she'd asked questions about the workers, the old docks being torn down, the loss of the old city. He said she'd taken his picture. "Nothing fancy," he said. "Just me with the cranes in the background." They talked a few times after that. Friendly at first. Then, he said, she started asking questions about permits, equipment storage, overnight access. Russ claimed he didn't know why she cared, but she wouldn't let it go. He told Kline that on the night she died, he'd gone back to the pier to pick up something from his truck, a drill, he said. He saw her near the fence, camera in hand, flash cutting through the fog. He said she startled him. Claimed she accused him of something dumping waste into the Sound, falsifying safety logs, something to do with the redevelopment company. He insisted she was mistaken. Then, he said, she tried to photograph him. "I grabbed the camera," he said. "Tried to stop her. The strap caught between them. She pulled back. He pulled harder. Then she stopped struggling." He said he didn't realize she'd stopped breathing until it was too late. He panicked. He hid the body near the rail yard and drove home. He tossed the camera into the water somewhere south of the pier. He told her all this with the calm of someone reciting a confession he'd already said 1,000 times in his head. The district attorney called it manslaughter on paper but murder in spirit. DNA on the strap was enough for probable cause. His fingerprints, preserved unknowingly inside the evidence bag, sealed the case. He was charged, booked, and held without bail. The trial never came. He pled guilty 2 months later. The headline ran July 10th, 2024. Construction worker admits to 1,991 killing of young photographer. Seattle exhaled. The city finally had an answer. But the truth rarely feels neat. When Detective Kline told Ruth Cartwright about the confession, the older woman didn't cry. She just nodded slowly, as if confirming something she'd already known deep down. "Does it bring you peace?" Kline asked. Ruth thought for a long moment before answering. "Peace isn't the same as quiet," she said. "It just means the noise has a name." The sentencing took 15 minutes. The courtroom was small. Ruth sat in the second row, clutching a folded photograph. Lena on the pier, camera raised mid-frame, eyes squinting at the light. Rusk sat expressionless at the defense table. When asked if he had anything to say, he said only, "I think about it every day." The judge sentenced him to 25 years to life. Reporters scribbled notes, but no one clapped. There are no heroes in cold cases, only survivors. When it was over, Kline escorted Ruth outside. Rain had started again, soft and steady. The old woman tilted her face toward it and whispered, "She always said the light here never leaves." After the case closed, Kline spent weeks cataloging the evidence. Each item went back into storage, sealed and signed with new labels. Case solved. Closure delivered. But there was one box left open, the one marked film, undeveloped. Inside, 3 canisters. All accounted for, all processed long ago. The final roll, the one that should have been in Lena's camera, was still missing. Kline thought about Rusk's story. He said he'd thrown the camera into the bay. Divers searched the area with sonar but found nothing. Too much time, too much current, too much change. The Sound keeps its secrets. Still, she couldn't let it go. The idea that Lena's last frame might still exist, somewhere buried in silt, waiting in darkness, felt like unfinished business. So one evening, long after the office had emptied, she took the file to the evidence room. She unsealed the old Polaroids from the original scene. There was Lena's car. There was the strap. And in one frame, barely visible in the background, something glinting by the fence line. A reflection? A fragment? Maybe nothing. But to a photographer's eye, it looked like glass. Like a lens. She sent the photo for digital enhancement. The technician called her 2 days later. "Could be the corner of a camera body," he said. "Or a piece of metal. Hard to tell after all these years." The frame went into evidence as inconclusive artifact #23. Another loose end in a case that refused to be perfectly tied. The city moved on again, the way cities always do. Pier 57 became a tourist stop, restaurants, an arcade, a rooftop Ferris wheel. Visitors posed for selfies where her car once sat. Few knew the story beneath their feet. Only the locals remembered. Every May 10th, a single flower still appears at the water's edge. Always at dawn. Always the same kind yellow tulip, Lena's favorite. No one's ever seen who leaves it. Some think it's her mother. But Ruth passed away the following spring. So maybe it's someone else. Maybe Joan. Maybe a stranger who never met her, but feels the weight of her name when fog drifts in from the bay. Or maybe it's the city itself, paying its annual debt to memory. Detective Kline stayed with the department another 5 years. She solved other cases, chased other ghosts. But the Cartwright file remained her compass. Whenever a new detective joined the cold case unit, she'd point to the box on the shelf and say, "That one's proof that evidence never forgets people, just stop listening." And on quiet nights, when she walked the waterfront, she'd catch herself glancing toward the water. Part of her still believed that somewhere beneath the tide, a camera rested in the dark, sealed in silt, its final frame intact. If they ever find it, and maybe one day they will, it'll be a black and white shot of the pier at night. Fog curling around lamplight. No faces, no struggle, no fear. Just the moment before the world changed. The last time the city was still whole. And in that image, maybe, she'll see what Lena saw all along. That light doesn't save us. It just remembers we were here.